Hey, old man, deliveries go around back. People like you don't walk through the front gate.
Give me that!
The words cut through the cold Illinois morning like a slap. 74-year-old Luther McCoy froze beside his faded blue '98 Chevy pickup, one hand still resting on the truck door. He had heard versions of that sentence his whole life on job sites, in diners, on sidewalks, but standing in front of a $9.8 million mansion in Naperville, it hit different. It felt heavier, sharper.
Get out of here!
Like the decades he'd fought to prove his worth had just been erased in one breath. The voice came from the security guard posted at the wrought iron gate, a tall white man with reflective sunglasses and a badge that shined brighter than his manners. He looked Luther up and down, as if cataloging everything that didn't belong: the worn denim jacket, the work boots, the sun-creased face of an old black man who had spent too many years outside in the Midwest winters. Luther didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened on the spine of the small leather notebook he always carried. He had driven nearly 40 minutes from Southside Chicago for this open house, and for a moment he wondered if turning the truck around would be easier, safer, less humiliating. But he didn't come all this way to be chased off by a man with a clipboard. "I'm here for the open house," Luther said simply. The guard snorted. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor of Chicago." A couple in designer coats stepped past them, staring at Luther, the way people stare at something out of place on a nice street, half curious, half annoyed. The woman whispered something under her breath. The man laughed. Luther ignored both of them and adjusted the frayed collar of his coat. He looked past the gate. The mansion sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn, the kind of property surrounded by stories, rumors, and zero affordable hopes. White stone, 3 floors, a circular driveway big enough to host a parade. The open house banners fluttered in the light wind, bright and welcoming unless you looked like Luther. The security guard lowered his sunglasses. "Listen, sir, this home is for pre-qualified buyers only, people with real money, real appointments. What you're looking for is about 10 miles east, down near Joliet. Plenty of fixer-uppers in your range." It wasn't the first time someone assumed his bank account based on his skin. But the sting never got lighter. Luther inhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man learns to take when anger threatens to rise and make a scene he doesn't want to make. His chest felt tight, not because of age, but because of memory. Memories of doors closed, jobs denied, neighborhoods he wasn't allowed to buy into, back when no coloreds wasn't said out loud, but still meant. A black SUV rolled up behind him. The guard straightened instantly, posture snapping into military neatness. But the vehicle wasn't focused on him. The passengers stayed inside, watching the tension escalate like a show. Luther cleared his throat. "I'm going inside. I have business here." The guard stepped directly in front of him, broad shoulders blocking the gate. "Not today, you don't." The words were final, dismissive. The kind of tone that said the conversation was over because the man in front of him decided it was. A younger guy, maybe mid-20s black, wearing a cold-weather beanie and a real estate intern badge, stood a few feet away, holding a stack of flyers. His eyes widened. He had seen everything. His mouth tightened, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Luther opened his leather notebook. Inside was the neatly folded printout of the open house schedule. It had his name on it. It had the time. It had the address. He held it up with steady hands. The security guard didn't even look at it. "Doesn't matter. You're not stepping through this gate." The humiliation burned hot under Luther's ribs. He stood alone on the wrong side of a gate he had every right to pass, surrounded by people who assumed they knew exactly who he was and what he wasn't. But the part that stung most, he had lived long enough to know this, wasn't the first time. And it sure wouldn't be the last. Still, he wasn't about to back down. Not today, not here, not again. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and said quietly, "Son, you're making a mistake." If only they knew the man they were laughing at was about to flip this entire neighborhood on its head. And by the time the truth came out, every person at that gate would wish they'd treated him very, very differently. The crowd didn't quiet down when Luther said the guard was making a mistake. If anything, it drew more attention. A couple more luxury SUVs pulled up along the curb outside the mansion. Wealthy buyers stepped out slick suits, fur-lined coats, boots that had never touched mud. They slowed their stride when they saw Luther standing there at the gate, the guard blocking him like he was trouble waiting to happen. A woman in a beige coat whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "This open house is going downhill already." Luther pretended he didn't hear her. After 74 years in America, picking which insults to ignore had become a quiet survival skill. The guard, emboldened by the murmurs around them, folded his arms across his chest. "Sir, you need to leave. Now. You're holding up actual buyers." Actual buyers. There it was again. The phrase people used when they meant something else entirely. Before Luther could speak, a smooth voice sliced through the chilly air. "Is there a problem here? I keep seeing people staring." A woman walked down the mansion's front steps, high heels clicking like tiny gunshots against polished stone. Vanessa Lang, the listing agent. Blonde hair, perfectly curled, expensive coat cinched at the waist, tablet in hand. She scanned the scene, then her eyes landed on Luther. In that moment, something changed in her expression. It was subtle but unmistakable judgment settling in like frost on a window. She approached the gate with a quick, irritated stride. "Sir," she said, not bothering to hide her annoyance, "this is a luxury property showing. You can't just walk in without qualification. This home is not open to every passerby." The guard nodded with the type of confidence only ignorance provides. "He claims he's here for the open house," he added, smirking. Vanessa laughed, sharp, short, and unkind. "Sweetheart, that's not how this works." Luther felt the heat rise behind his ears. Not anger, yet just that heavy, familiar pressure of being talked down to like a child, like someone too simple to understand the rules of a world he wasn't meant to enter. "I registered online," Luther said calmly. "My name is—" She cut him off with a raised hand, a gesture reserved for people she didn't consider worth her time. "You don't need to give your name," Vanessa said. "You need to understand this neighborhood." A few guests chuckled behind her. The sound rolled through the yard like a wave. The young black intern, his badge reading Trent Holloway, stood a little ways off, clutching a tray of brochures. His brows furrowed. He looked like he wanted to intervene, but didn't know how without risking his internship. Vanessa held out a different flyer, thinner and printed on cheap stock. "Here," she said, practically shoving it toward him. "These are the homes in your price bracket. Some nice starter places over in Aurora. You might like those." Luther didn't reach for it. He wasn't new to humiliation, but something about this being tossed aside in front of strangers like trash cut deeper than usual. Maybe because he'd come here today with hope. Maybe because he'd worked too long and too hard to accept being dismissed again. Vanessa leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a level that was meant to sting. "You don't want to embarrass yourself, do you? Or cause a scene? I'm sure you're a nice man. But let's be realistic." A man nearby whispered, "He looks like he's here to fix the furnace." Another laughed. "Yeah, or mow the lawn." Luther's jaw clenched. His heart tightened the same way it had years ago when a banker once told him during the redlining era that black folks shouldn't aim too high when buying property. He had spent decades swallowing moments like this, pushing on building a life despite the ceilings painted invisible over his head. But today he wasn't swallowing anything. He removed his gloves, tucked them slowly into his jacket pocket, and met Vanessa's stare head-on. "I'm going inside," he said quietly. Vanessa's expression snapped from condescension to irritation. "Absolutely not. If you don't step away from the gate right now, I'll have security escort you off the street." The guard straightened, gripping his radio like he was ready to call backup. Trent, still clutching his brochures, finally stepped forward. "Ms. Lang, you might want to." She silenced him with a glare so sharp it could have sliced stone. "Not now." A crowd had fully formed by then, dozens of eyes watching phones angled subtly upward. Luther could hear the clicks of screens waking up. A few people recorded openly, not caring who saw. And there, he stood, an old, black man, on a wealthy Illinois street surrounded by strangers who had already decided his worth before he ever spoke a full sentence. He exhaled slowly. The humiliation settled in his chest like a weight, but beneath it, beneath all the years of being pushed aside, something else started to burn. Something he hadn't felt this strongly in a long, long time. Resolve. Just when the tension felt like it couldn't stretch another inch, something shifted in Luther's eyes, a quiet fire, old but unbroken. And the crowd didn't know it yet, but the next move he made would change everything they thought they understood about him. Luther had been talked down to before. But this was different. This wasn't just one rude woman or a guard with a power complex. This was the whole system lining up against him right there on a quiet street in Naperville, Illinois on a cold Saturday morning. Vanessa crossed her arms, tapping her nails against her designer coat. "Security, I need you to escort this gentleman off the premises. We're not doing this today." The guard didn't hesitate. He stepped forward like someone who had waited all morning for action. But Luther didn't move. He had planted his boots on that brick walkway like roots, the kind that had been growing inside him for decades, rooted in Southside Chicago, in long nights, fixing train engines on frozen tracks, in the memory of every time someone tried to make him feel small. "I'm not leaving," Luther said, calm but firm. Phones lifted higher. People stopped pretending they weren't watching. Someone whispered, "This is about to get messy." Vanessa shook her head, annoyed that he wasn't folding. "Sir, you do not have an appointment, and this property requires financial verification. We can't just let anyone wander inside." "Anyone," a tiny word with a long shadow. Luther's jaw tightened. "I registered. It shows my name." She waved her hand dismissively. "We get spam registrations all the time, people trolling the listing. You don't seriously expect me to believe?" Before she could finish, a white man in a navy peacoat stepped closer, gesturing with his phone. "Ma'am, are you really blocking people based on how they look? 'Cause that's what it seems like." Vanessa's smile sharpened into something colder. "Sir, I'm following protocol. We can't risk people entering who don't belong in this price category." The crowd murmured. Even some of the guests shifted uncomfortably, but Vanessa wasn't finished. She motioned toward the guard. "Call your supervisor. Let's document this. I don't want corporate thinking I allowed unauthorized entry." The guard stepped aside to radio in backup. His posture, straight spine, puffed chest, told Luther exactly what kind of report he planned to file. Meanwhile, the young black intern, Trent Holloway, stared at the ground. His grip tightened on the brochure's knuckles, turning white. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with something Luther recognized immediately. Shame. Not shame for himself, but shame for recognizing a fight he'd seen too many times, happening again in front of him. "Ms. Lang," Trent said quietly. "Maybe you should." She snapped her fingers at him. "Trent, I said, I've got this." The dismissal hit him like a cuff to the back of the head. He stepped back, lips pressed tight. Luther looked at the young man, same skin, different generation, same fight. And something in his chest tightened again, not from humiliation this time, but from the weight of watching the next generation deal with the same old battles. The guard returned after a brief exchange on his radio. "Supervisor says we need proof of funds, ma'am. Standard procedure for anyone insisting they belong at a showing like this." Vanessa folded her arms triumphantly. "There we go. Corporate rules." She turned to Luther. "So unless you have documents proving you can even entertain a home like this, I highly suggest you step aside. You're holding up people who actually came to buy." She extended her arm again with the cheap flyer. A brochure listing small starter homes 25 miles away. Luther didn't touch it. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket. Very slowly aware, the guard was already tense and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Weathered edges. Printed ink slightly faded from time. He held it up. "This is the open house confirmation," Luther said. "My name's on it. My appointment time's on it." Vanessa glanced at it like it was a napkin. "I'm not scanning that." "You really think a printed piece of paper proves you can afford this place?" Someone in the crowd hissed softly. Another muttered, "Yikes." But Vanessa kept going. "You want me to verify every self-printed document any random person brings?" "No. That's not how million-dollar properties work. So unless you have real proof, bank statements, letters from lenders, something credible, this conversation is over." The wind picked up, rustling the trees around them. Luther's hands didn't shake, but something inside him did a ripple of old pain, old memories. A flash of 1981. A young Luther standing outside a realtor's office in downstate Illinois, being told the home he wanted had just sold minutes before he arrived. He later learned the house stayed on the market 2 more months. He learned something else, too. His skin tone had walked into the room before he did. Standing in front of the gate now, decades later, the same feeling chilled his bones, but he lifted his chin. "I'm not showing you anything," Luther said. "Not my bank, not my money, not my name, not until you stop assuming I can't afford to be here." Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. "You really think attitude will change anything?" "Sir, look around. Look at the buyers here. This is not your lane." The sentence landed harder than any shove. Trent flinched. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Man, that's rough." Another lifted their phone higher, recording everything. The wind grew colder. The tension grew thicker. The humiliation pressed deeper. But beneath it, unnoticed by almost everyone, a shift began in Luther's eyes. Not sadness, not anger. Something older, stronger, forged across decades. Resolve becoming unshakable. Steel settling behind his calm expression. They thought they knew who he was. They were about to learn how wrong they were. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Not the guard, not Vanessa, not the crowd that had formed like a live studio audience, watching a man get stripped down inch by inch. Luther stood still, the crisp winter air biting at his cheeks. He kept his eyes on Vanessa, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink. But inside, something old stirred. Something he hadn't wanted to feel again. The guard stepped closer. "Sir, this is your last warning." But Luther didn't hear him. Not really. Because the scene unfolding in front of the mansion, people judging him by his jacket, his skin, his age, it wasn't new. It was memory. The world around him faded until he wasn't standing on a brick driveway in Naperville anymore. He was 34 again. Younger, stronger, angrier. Flashback. Summer 1981. Bloomington, Illinois. The sun was unforgiving that day, beating down on a small real estate office off Veterans Parkway. Luther had spent months saving every extra dollar he could from working double shifts on the rail yard. He had found a small 2-story house, nothing fancy, but clean safe with a yard big enough to host his niece's birthday cookouts. He remembered stepping inside that real estate office with hope in his chest. But the receptionist never looked up. "Someone like you," she finally said, eyes still on her paperwork. "They don't sell those homes to your kind. You might want to try the east side. More suitable options over there." Luther remembered the burn behind his ribs, remembered leaving quietly, remembered pretending he wasn't hurt so his younger cousins wouldn't see. He never told anyone. He just kept working. And now, 40 years later, the same sting pressed against his chest, bitter as ever. Back to the present, Naperville, Illinois. The flashback ended as suddenly as it came. The cold air, the crowd, the phones, Vanessa's smirk, everything snapped back into focus. Luther inhaled slowly, pulling himself out of the memory like a man rising from deep water. Trent, the young intern, stepped forward again. Miss Lang, I think you need to look at Vanessa shut him down with a flick of her hand. Trent, enough. You're here to pass out brochures, not question my judgment. Something inside Trent's eyes dimmed like hope being snuffed out. Vanessa turned back to Luther, her patience gone. Sir, I have asked you politely. You're not approved to enter, and this conversation is polite. Luther murmured. It wasn't loud, but the word cracked through the air like a whip. Vanessa blinked, thrown off. Excuse me? Luther looked her dead in the eye, his voice steady deep but carrying weight like gravel rolling under a train wheel. Do you have any idea how many times I've been told where I do and don't belong? How many people like you said it politely and thought that made it better? She stiffened, but he didn't stop. I've spent my whole life building things in this state. Rails you drive over, freight lines that keep your stores full. I've worked in snowstorms, heat waves, nights so cold the metal froze under my hands. I paid taxes, raised my kids, buried friends who never got a chance to grow old. The crowd shifted. Some lowered their phones. Others listened more intently. And now I'm 74, Luther said. All I want is to walk through a front door without being treated like I snuck in through the back. Silence. Raw, thick silence. Vanessa should have stopped, should have taken the out, should have recognized the moment. But she didn't. Her chin tilted, her lips hardened. Pride wouldn't let her bend. Well, she said coldly, your feelings don't change the rules. And the rules say, you don't have access. Luther nodded once, slow, almost sad. Because he had finally accepted it, this wasn't about rules. This was about her deciding he didn't belong long before he said a single word. And that was a mistake she would regret sooner than she could imagine. A black SUV rolled quietly down the street toward the mansion. Nobody noticed it yet. Not Vanessa, not the guard, not even Trent. But Luther felt something shift in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. He didn't know it yet. But his past, his dignity, and the truth about who he really was, all of it was about to collide with this moment. And everything was about to change. Hey, friend, before we continue, I need a quick favor from you. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode on this channel. It's free, takes only a second, and it helps us more than you know. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story can travel across the world. Thank you so much. Now back to the story. The black SUV rolled to a slow stop at the edge of the mansion's driveway, engine humming low like a steady warning. Nobody paid attention at first. Everyone was too busy watching Luther stand alone against Vanessa and the guard. But then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out in a charcoal coat, clean-shaven mid-40s, moving with the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to. His presence alone made a few people lower their phones. Luther recognized the silhouette before he even saw the face. Roland Carter, Regional Director for Midlands Estate Group, a man whose signature sat on half the big real estate deals across Illinois, the kind of person Vanessa bragged about meeting once in an elevator. Roland glanced around, taking in the tension, the crowd, the stiff posture of the guard. When his eyes landed on Luther, his entire expression shifted surprise, then recognition, then something almost like relief. He walked straight toward the gate. Mr. McCoy, Roland said, voice warm. Sir, what are you doing standing out here? Vanessa's head snapped toward him so fast her curls bounced. Mr. Carter, sir, I didn't know you were arriving early. But Roland wasn't looking at her, not even a glance. His attention stayed locked on Luther. I expected you inside. Already, he said. You didn't get the service you needed. Luther opened his mouth, but Roland didn't give him time to answer. He turned to the guard, voice tightening just enough to show authority. Why is this man being stopped? The guard hesitated, suddenly unsure. Ms. Lang said he wasn't on the qualified list, and he couldn't show. That's not your call to make. Roland snapped, and it's not hers either. A ripple moved through the crowd. Vanessa went pale, but tried to recover. Sir, with all due respect, she said, stepping forward. There was confusion. He didn't appear to be. Roland finally looked at her, and the look alone shut her up. Appear, he repeated, eyebrows raised. Is that the word you want to use right now? Vanessa swallowed hard. Roland turned back to Luther. Mr. McCoy? I apologize for the disrespect. Truly, you should never have been held at this gate. Trent, standing to the side, let out a small breath he had been holding. This was the moment he had hoped for, but didn't expect to see. Vanessa forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Of course, I was just making sure everything was secure. Roland ignored her again. He stepped fully to Luther's side, his tone shifting to something reverent. Folks, let me make this clear. This man is no random visitor. You're looking at the reason half our South and West rail projects even exist. Luther's face tightened with modest discomfort. Roland, you don't have to. But Roland lifted a hand respectfully. 20 years ago, he said to the crowd, my little sister and I were trapped in a stalled rail car outside Joliet during a winter freeze. He was on shift. He climbed under that car in 0-degree weather to fix the coupling and get us moving. Saved our lives. The murmurs grew louder. I never forgot that night, Roland continued. Most people don't meet their heroes. I did. Vanessa's mouth fell open. The guard went stiff. Trent stared at Luther with something close to awe. And for everyone's clarity, Roland added, Mr. McCoy is not just a guest today. He's a silent investor in our affordable housing expansions across Illinois. He's earned the right to walk into any home we list. Luther shifted uncomfortably. He never liked the spotlight. Roland, you didn't need to bring all that up. No, sir, Roland said firmly. This needed to be said. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a slim leather folder, then handed it to Luther. Your certified bank draft, Roland explained. $9.5 million. I had it prepared like you asked. A gasp rolled through the crowd like shockwave. Vanessa took a stumbling step back. What do you mean, draft? Roland shut her down with a look colder than the Illinois wind. He's paying cash, Roland said simply. Full amount. No mortgage, no escrow delays. This is our priority client. Phones dropped from hands. Shocked faces turned toward Luther. The man they'd dismissed, mocked, shoved aside, was now revealed as the buyer every realtor dreamed of landing. And Vanessa. She looked like the ground had opened under her feet. Roland faced the guard one last time. Open that gate, and make sure nobody else here forgets who deserves respect. The guard rushed to press the button. The heavy iron gate swung open. But Luther didn't move right away. He looked at Vanessa, not smug, not angry, just deeply, quietly disappointed. The kind of look that stung worse than yelling. Roland rested a hand lightly on Luther's shoulder. Sir, let me walk you in. Luther nodded once and stepped through the gate. The crowd parted like water around him. Not because he was rich, not because of the title or the bank draft, but because, for the first time that morning, they finally saw the truth he belonged more than any of them ever did. The inside of the gate felt different. Not just because Luther was finally past the barrier, but because the entire energy shifted the moment he stepped through. It was like the cold air loosened its grip, like the house itself recognized him before the people did. Roland walked beside him, matching his pace. I'm really sorry this happened, sir. None of it should have gone down that way. Luther nodded, but his eyes stayed forward. He wasn't angry, not in the loud, explosive way people expected. His anger was quiet, old settled deep in his bones, the kind that didn't need yelling to be real. Behind them, the crowd buzzed in scattered confusion. People whispered, phones recorded. A few guests avoided eye contact altogether, embarrassed they had laughed at the wrong man. But Vanessa. She wasn't embarrassed. She was spiraling. She stormed after them in her heels, stopping just short of grabbing Roland's arm. Sir, please. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Roland turned, not slowing his walk. What part of this situation could possibly be misunderstood? Vanessa forced a brittle smile. I only followed procedure. That's all. I never meant any disrespect. I was just protecting the integrity of the showing. Integrity? Roland repeated, eyes narrowing. Trent kept his distance behind her, clutching the brochures he no longer knew what to do with. Vanessa gestured weakly toward Luther. He didn't look like someone prepared to purchase a property of this caliber. I was safeguarding company policy. Roland stopped walking. His silence was heavy. Then he spoke slow, measured, but sharp in every syllable. Company policy, he said, does not include profiling customers based on appearance. Vanessa swallowed hard. That's not what I did. Trent stepped forward. Miss Lang, you literally said he wasn't in the right lane, in front of everyone. Vanessa snapped, Trent, not now. Her voice cracked on the last word. Roland's brows lifted. He's right. You said something extremely inappropriate, and multiple people recorded it. A man nearby raised his phone. I got the whole thing if HR needs it. Vanessa's face drained of color. Roland continued. I don't know what's worse, the disrespect or the fact you did it so confidently like it was normal. The words hit her harder than yelling ever could have. Sir Vanessa tried again, voice shaking. Now I've worked here for 9 years. You know my record. You know my closings. You know I'm not that person. Maybe you didn't think you were, Roland said, but today you showed us who you really are. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Roland gestured toward the path. Please return to your vehicle. HR will contact you by the end of the day, and effective immediately you're suspended from all showings. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. Vanessa let out a shaky breath. Roland, please. One mistake can't erase. It wasn't one mistake, Roland said firmly. It started the moment you decided he didn't belong. For a brief second, Luther looked back at her. Not with spite, not with satisfaction. Just quiet truth. The kind of look that said, I've survived worse than you. Vanessa's eyes trembled. She realized then there was no undoing what she'd done. No explaining away her assumptions. No rewinding the words she'd spoken with half the town watching. She turned and walked back toward the gate steps, unsteady heels, wobbling in gravel. Trent watched her go, expression heavy with something more complicated than judgment, maybe disappointment. Maybe the pain of seeing someone fall the exact way the system taught them to behave. Roland exhaled. Let's head in, Mr. McCoy. They entered the mansion through the grand front door. Warm light spilled across polished hardwood floors. Chandeliers glowed overhead. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air. But Luther didn't rush. He paused in the foyer, taking in the staircase, the tall windows, the view of the acres behind the house. Beautiful place, he said quietly. Roland nodded. It is. You deserve to see every part of it without feeling judged. Luther let out a long breath. I've been turned away from a lot of doors in my life, more than I can count, but something about today, it hit different. Roland's voice softened. Because you shouldn't be fighting this fight at 74. Luther gave a small smile. Nobody should. Not at any age. They walked farther into the home, the formal living room, the open kitchen, the sunroom facing the lawn. Roland talked through features, market value upgrades, design choices, but Luther barely heard him. He was hearing something else, the voices of the past. Every time he'd been told he wasn't enough, every time someone assumed his worth before he even spoke, and now he was standing inside a mansion worth nearly $10 million. Not because he needed validation, not because he needed to prove them wrong, but because he'd earned it. Every mile, every shift, every cold night on the rails, every quiet moment of dignity he'd held on to when the world tried to take it. This wasn't about buying a house. This was about reclaiming the space he'd been denied over and over again for decades. And the story wasn't finished yet, not even close. The tour moved slowly through the mansion, but not because of the size. It was because Luther paused in every room, not in awe, not in pride, but in reflection. He stopped in the library, running a hand across the empty shelves. He stood at the upstairs landing, looking out the tall window at the frozen yard. He walked through the master bedroom, imagining sunlight filling the space each morning. But none of it felt like a place meant just for him. Roland noticed. "You're quiet today, Mr. McCoy. More than usual." Luther took a breath, deep and steady. Just thinking. About the house. About what a house can be, Luther corrected. They stopped in the great room, a wide space with vaulted ceilings, perfect acoustics, and windows that washed the room in soft winter light. Roland stood beside him, waiting. Luther finally spoke. "You remember when I first called you about this property?" he asked. Roland nodded. "You said you wanted a place with space. Room to grow something." "Yeah," Luther murmured. "But I wasn't talking about a garden." Roland frowned slightly. "Then what were you talking about?" Luther looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time, not as a mansion, but as potential, as healing, as justice. "I want to turn this into a center," he said. "A place for black seniors. Somewhere warm, safe. Somewhere they can sit in dignity, not in fear or loneliness." Roland's eyes widened. "A community home." "Here, right here," Luther said firmly. "In the same neighborhood that once didn't want us. In the same kind of home we were told we'd never afford. I want our elders to walk through a front door that was never open for them before." Trent had followed them into the room, staying respectfully near the doorway. When he heard Luther's idea, his breath caught. "You'd do that?" Trent asked softly. Luther turned to him. "Son, folks my age have fought too long just to survive. Some of us never got the chance to breathe. If I can give even a few of them a place to rest with pride, then every mile I worked on those rails will mean something." Trent's voice cracked. "My grandma, she would have loved a place like this." Luther nodded gently. "Then maybe you can help me build it?" The young man's eyes shined hope, flickering back where shame used to sit. Roland looked from Trent to Luther, then back to the mansion. "If this is what you want, I'll support you every step of the way." Luther smiled, not the smile of a man who won a fight, but of someone who finally laid a burden down. "This house isn't about me," he said. "It's about the people who never got their doors opened. I want this place to open for them." He walked toward the center of the room, sunlight catching the edges of his coat. For the first time that morning, he felt warm. He didn't buy this mansion to prove Vanessa wrong. He didn't buy it to flaunt money. He bought it to give his community something he never had, a place where they belonged without question. Outside, the last of the crowd drifted away. The gate stood open now, not forced, not guarded, but welcoming. Luther looked back at Roland and Trent. "Let's get the paperwork done," he said. "We got work to do." And in that moment, the mansion stopped being a symbol of exclusion and became a home built on legacy dignity and something even stronger, hope. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story touched, you don't stop here. There are so many more powerful stories waiting for you. Tap the playlist on the screen and jump into the next episode right now.